he discovered Da. Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the cold metal of the observation deck, watching the stars drift by in the endless void. The research vessel Endeavour Prime had been her home for 3 years now, exploring the outer rim of human space. As the ship's lead xenobiologist, she spent most of her time studying samples from dead worlds, hoping to find traces of life that once existed among the stars. The proximity alarm shattered the peaceful silence. Sarah rushed to the main console, where Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez was already pulling up the sensor readings. His face was tense with concentration as he analyzed the data streaming across multiple screens. "What do we have, Marcus?" Sarah asked, leaning over his shoulder to examine the readings. "Unknown vessel, about 2 kilometers off our starboard bow. It's big, Sarah, really big, and it's not showing up in any of our databases." Marcus highlighted the object on the main display. The ship appeared as a dark silhouette against the stars. Its hull reflecting no light, Captain James Morrison entered the bridge, his weathered face showing the strain of 30 years in deep space. "Report, Lieutenant." "Sir, we've detected what appears to be a derelict vessel. No power signatures, no life signs. It's been drifting here for what looks like centuries, maybe longer." Marcus transferred the data to the captain's personal display. Sarah felt her heart racing. In all her years of exploration, she had never encountered anything like this. The ship's design was unlike anything in human records. Its hull curved, in impossible ways, with sections that seemed to fold in on themselves. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing faintly with an inner light that defied explanation. "It's beautiful," she whispered, unable to hide her fascination. "Captain, we need to investigate. This could be the discovery of a lifetime." Morrison studied the readings carefully. It could also be a trap. "We know so little about what's out." Here he paused, considering the risks. "But you're right, Dr. Chen. We can't pass up an opportunity like this. Assemble a boarding party. I want full environmental suits in every scanner we have." 2 hours later, Sarah found herself floating through the vacuum of space, tethered to the Endeavour Prime by a safety line. The alien vessel loomed ahead of them, its massive bulk blocking out the stars. Engineer Paul Martinez floated beside her, his scanner sweeping the ship's hull for any sign of danger. "Hull integrity looks solid," Paul reported through the comm system. "Whatever this thing is made of, it's incredibly durable. I'm reading some kind of crystalline structure integrated into the metal." They found an airlock near what appeared to be the ship's center. The design was elegant but alien, with controls that resembled flowing water rather than traditional buttons or switches. Sarah approached the interface, her gloved hands hovering over the strange symbols. "Sarah, are you sure about this?" Marcus asked through the comm. He was stationed back on the Endeavour Prime, monitoring their progress. "Sometimes you have to take risks to make discoveries," she replied, pressing her hand against the largest symbol. To her amazement, the airlock responded immediately, cycling through its sequence with smooth precision. The interior of the ship was even more magnificent than the outside. The walls seemed to pulse with a soft, bioluminescent glow, and the corridors curved in graceful arcs that felt more organic than mechanical. Sarah led the team deeper into the vessel, following what appeared to be a main corridor toward the ship's center. "The atmosphere is breathable," Paul announced, checking his readings. "Oxygen levels are actually higher than standard human baseline. It's like this ship was designed for beings similar to us." They reached what could only be the bridge, the room was circular, with a raised platform in the center surrounded by workstations that seemed to grow from the floor itself. At the heart of the platform stood a crystalline structure about 3 meters tall, its surface covered in the same flowing symbols they had seen on the exterior. Sarah approached the crystal carefully. As she drew closer, it began to pulse with brighter light, and she could swear she heard something like music emanating from its core. "It's some kind of computer system," she said, "but the technology is far beyond anything we've ever seen." She reached out to touch the crystal's surface, and the moment her gloved fingers made contact, the entire room came alive. Holographic displays materialized around them, showing star charts, technical readouts, and what appeared to be historical records. The symbols on the displays shifted and changed, as if the system was trying to communicate. "Sarah, you need to see this," Paul called from one of the workstations. He was studying a holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. "This isn't just a ship, it's a library. Look at all this data." The information was overwhelming. The ship contained records spanning millions of years, documenting the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Sarah realized they had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple derelict vessel. This was the collected knowledge of an entire species. As she studied the displays, patterns began to emerge. The symbols weren't random. They followed linguistic rules that reminded her of ancient human languages. Sarah had always been gifted with languages, speaking 7 fluently and understanding the basics of dozens more. She began to see connections, relationships between the symbols that suggested meaning. "I think I can decode some of this," she said, her excitement growing. "Give me some time to work with the patterns." Hours passed as Sarah worked tirelessly to understand the alien language. The ship's systems seemed to respond to her efforts, providing additional context and examples when she struggled with particularly complex concepts. It was as if the ship wanted to be understood. Finally, she made a breakthrough. The central crystal wasn't just a computer. It was an artificial intelligence, the last remnant of a species called the HFY. As she deciphered more of the records, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The HFY had been an ancient and powerful civilization, masters of technology that seemed like magic to human eyes. They had explored the galaxy for millennia, spreading knowledge and peace wherever they went. But something had happened to them, something that had forced them to abandon their worlds and flee into the void. "Paul, Marcus, you need to hear this," Sarah said, her voice tight with urgency. "The HFY didn't just disappear. They were destroyed by something called the Void Swarm. According to these records, it's a force of pure destruction that consumes entire star systems." The AI, which had identified itself as Zaroth, began to communicate more directly now that Sarah had established a basic understanding of its language. Through a combination of symbols, images, and mathematical concepts, it painted a terrifying picture of an enemy that had already consumed half the galaxy. "The swarm moves in cycles," Sarah translated as the AI shared its knowledge. "It appears every few million years, destroying everything in its path, then retreating to unknown regions of space." The HFY managed to predict its return, but they couldn't stop it. The most chilling revelation came when Zaroth showed them the swarm's projected path. The enemy was heading directly toward human space, and according to the AI's calculations, it would arrive within months, not years. "We have to warn Earth," Marcus said, his voice filled with dread. "Our entire civilization is in danger." But Zaroth had more to show them. The HFY had not given up without a fight. They had developed weapons and technologies specifically designed to combat the swarm, and they had hidden this knowledge in ships like this one, scattered across the galaxy in the hope that younger species might find them and continue the fight. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Humanity had always prided itself on its ability to adapt and overcome challenges, but this was beyond anything they had ever faced. The Void Swarm had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than theirs. "There's something else," she said, studying the AI's final message. "Zareth says the Kethver believed that the key to defeating the swarm wasn't just technology. It was something they called the spark of defiance, the refusal to accept defeat even when facing impossible odds." The AI's crystal pulsed brighter, and Sarah realized it was trying to tell them something important. The Kethver had recognized this spark in humanity's early transmissions, signals that had reached their sensors decades ago. They had been watching human civilization grow and develop, seeing in them the same stubborn refusal to give up that had once defined their own species. "We need to get this information back to Earth immediately," Sarah said. "But we also need to understand these Kethver technologies. They might be our only hope." As if responding to her words, the AI began downloading massive amounts of data to the Endeavour Prime's computers. Technical specifications, weapon designs, and strategic information flowed across the connection. But Sarah noticed something else. In the data stream, a personal message from Zareth, addressed specifically to her, ***. The AI had been alone for centuries, the last remnant of its people, waiting for someone to find it and carry on their mission. It had chosen Sarah not just because she had decoded its language, but because she embodied the qualities the Kethver had seen in humanity: curiosity, determination, and the refusal to accept defeat. "Dr. Chen," Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the comm system, "we're detecting massive energy readings approaching our position. Whatever's out there, it's big and it's moving fast." Sarah's blood ran cold as she looked at the AI's display. The Void Swarm had arrived earlier than predicted, drawn by the activation of the Kethver ship. Dark shapes were emerging from hyperspace, their forms defying description as they moved with purpose toward human space. "We need to go now," she said, but even as she spoke, she knew it might already be too late. The enemy had found them, and humanity's greatest test was about to begin. The last stand, the journey back to Earth, had taken 3 weeks. 3 weeks of frantic preparation as the crew of the Endeavour Prime worked around the clock to understand the Kethver technology. Sarah had barely slept, spending every waking moment studying the alien data while the ship's engineers attempted to integrate the new knowledge into human systems. The sight that greeted them in Earth's orbit was both inspiring and terrifying. The entire human fleet had assembled, every ship from the smallest patrol craft to the massive dreadnoughts of the Colonial Defense Force. Admiral Helena Voss, the fleet's commander, had taken Sarah's warnings seriously, but even she seemed overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they faced. "Dr. Chen," Admiral Voss said as Sarah entered the command center aboard the flagship Defiance, "tell me you have good news." Sarah looked around the room at the assembled officers, seeing a mixture of hope and fear in their faces. "The Kethver technology is incredibly advanced, but it's not magic. We've managed to adapt some of their weapon systems to our ships, and we understand their basic tactical principles." She activated a holographic display showing the approaching Void Swarm. The enemy force was massive, stretching across light years of space like a dark tide. Individual ships were impossible to distinguish, They moved as a single entity, consuming everything in their path. The swarm operates on a hive mind principle, Sarah explained. They don't think like us. They don't negotiate. They don't retreat. And they don't show mercy. They simply consume. Admiral Voss studied the display grimly. What are our chances? Honestly, if we fight them conventionally, we'll lose. The Kethvo were far more advanced than us, and they barely managed to slow the swarm down. Sarah paused, looking at the faces around her. But we're not the Kethvo. We're human, and that might be our advantage. She pulled up another display showing the modifications they had made to the human fleet. We've integrated Kethvo shield technology into our ships, and we've managed to reproduce some of their weapons. But more importantly, we've learned to think like them. The Kethvo had been methodical in their approach to warfare, relying on superior technology and careful planning. Humans, Sarah had realized, were different. They were chaotic, unpredictable, and willing to take risks that would seem insane to other species. The AI, Zerath, has been studying our tactical records, Sarah continued. It's fascinated by our ability to adapt and improvise. The Kethvo always fought the same way, which is why the swarm eventually learnt to counter them. A young lieutenant named Rachel Torres raised her hand. Dr. Chen, are you saying we should abandon proven tactics? No, Sarah replied. I'm saying we should use our humanity as a weapon. The swarm expects us to fight like the Kethvo, but we won't. We'll fight like humans. The first contact came 18 hours later. The Void Swarm emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, their dark forms blotting out the stars. Sarah was on the bridge of the Defiance, standing next to Admiral Voss as they watched the enemy approach. Fleet status report, Voss commanded. All ships report ready, Admiral, came the reply. Kethvo weapons are online and functioning. Sarah felt a familiar presence in her mind. Zeroth had established a direct link with her, allowing the AI to observe the battle through her eyes. The ancient intelligence was curious about how humans would handle their first encounter with the swarm. They're not like anything we've faced before, Sarah whispered to the AI. But that works both ways. The swarm moved with eerie precision, their ships forming perfect geometric patterns as they advanced. Sarah could see the tactical logic in their approach. They were preparing to envelop the human fleet in a crushing embrace. All ships execute Plan Sigma, Admiral Voss ordered. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, the human fleet scattered in apparently random directions. To an outside observer, it would look like panic, but Sarah knew better. Each ship was following a carefully calculated course that would bring them into position for what the humans had dubbed organized chaos. The swarm paused, confused by the human response. They had expected a traditional battle formation, not this wild scattering of forces. In that moment of hesitation, the human fleet struck. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the comm system from the Endeavour Prime. Sarah, your modifications are working perfectly. The swarm ships can't adapt to our weapon frequencies. The battle was unlike anything in recorded history. Human ships darted through the swarm formation like angry wasps, striking at weak points that the Kethvo had identified centuries ago. But instead of the methodical assault the AI expected, the humans fought with creative fury. Commander Lisa Park, leading a squadron of destroyers, performed a maneuver that would have been impossible for Kethvo pilots. She led her ships in a spiraling dive through the heart of the swarm formation, her weapons blazing as she carved a path of destruction through the enemy ranks. This is insane, Zareth communicated to Sarah. No logical species would attempt such a maneuver. That's exactly why it's working, Sarah replied, watching as Park's squadron emerged from the other side of the formation, having destroyed twice their number in enemy ships. The swarm began to adapt, their formations shifting to counter the human tactics. But every time they adjusted, the humans changed their approach. Lieutenant Torres led a group of fighters in a mock retreat, drawing a portion of the swarm away from the main battle before revealing it as a trap. Sarah realized what was happening. The swarm's greatest strength was also its weakness. Their hive mind allowed for perfect coordination, but it also made them predictable. They couldn't understand the chaotic creativity of human warfare. Admiral Sarah said, "I have an idea. It's dangerous, but it might end this." Voss looked at her intently. "What do you have in mind?" "The swarm's hive mind has a central nexus ship. If we can destroy it, the entire force will be crippled. But it's protected by the strongest part of their formation. And you think we can reach it?" Sarah smiled grimly. "I think we can do something the Kethver never tried. We can make them come to us." The plan was audacious, even by human standards. The Defiance would broadcast a signal using modified Kethver technology, making it appear to be the primary threat to the swarm. Every enemy ship would converge on their position, creating a massive concentration of force. "Are you sure about this, Dr. Chen?" Admiral Voss asked as they prepared to execute the plan. "No," Sarah admitted, "but being sure is overrated. Sometimes you have to take the leap and trust that you'll find a way to fly." The signal went out, and the swarm responded exactly as Sarah had predicted. Thousands of enemy ships converged on the Defiance, their weapons charging as they prepared to eliminate what they perceived as the greatest threat. Asterisk. "Now," Sarah shouted. The entire human fleet, which had been scattered across the solar system, suddenly converged on the swarm's nexus ship. While the enemy was focused on the Defiance, the real attack was coming from behind. The nexus ship was massive, larger than any human vessel, but it was also isolated. Captain Morrison led the charge, his ship's Kethver weapons tearing through the enemy's defenses. Behind him came dozens of other ships, each one firing with desperate intensity. Sarah watched the battle unfold, her heart pounding as she realized their plan was working. The swarm's perfect coordination was breaking down as their nexus ship came under attack. Individual ships began to operate independently, their movements becoming erratic and confused. "It's working," Lieutenant Torres reported from her fighter. "The swarm is losing cohesion, but the victory came at a cost." The Nexus ship's destruction sent out a massive energy pulse that disabled several human vessels. The Defiance itself was heavily damaged, its hull breached in multiple places as the energy pulse faded. Sarah looked out at the battlefield. The swarm ships were drifting aimlessly, their hive mind severed. Some were already beginning to power down, their purpose lost. Without central coordination. "We did it," Admiral Voss said, her voice filled with amazement. "We actually did it," but Sarah wasn't finished. She approached the communication console, preparing to broadcast a message that would reach every corner of the galaxy. The Void Swarm had been defeated, but more importantly, humanity had proven something that no other species had managed to demonstrate. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen of the human species," she began, her voice carrying across the stars. "We have faced the Void Swarm and emerged victorious, not through superior technology, but through the simple refusal to accept defeat." She paused, thinking of Zareth and the Kethver, of all the species that had fallen before this enemy. The galaxy is not doomed. The swarm can be defeated. All it takes is the courage to fight differently, to embrace the chaos that makes us who we are. Sarath's presence in her mind was warm with approval. The AI had learned something valuable from observing humanity in battle. The spark of defiance that the Kethfa had recognized in early human transmissions was real, and it was powerful enough to change the course of galactic history. Dr. Chen, the AI communicated, "My people would be proud. You have succeeded where we failed, not because you were stronger, but because you were willing to be unpredictable." Sarah smiled, looking out at the stars with new hope. Humanity had taken its first steps onto the galactic stage, and they had done so by being uniquely, stubbornly human. The galaxy would never be the same. In the months that followed, the victory over the Void Swarm became legendary. Species from across the galaxy sought out humanity, eager to learn from the newcomers who had achieved the impossible. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, serving as Earth's first xenodiplomatic ambassador. But she never forgot the lesson of that battle. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or its weapons. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to give up, even when facing impossible odds. That spark of defiance had lit a flame that would burn across the galaxy for generations to come. The Kethfa had been wrong about one thing. The key to defeating the swarm wasn't just refusing to accept defeat. It was being willing to fight for something worth preserving. With all the chaotic creativity that made life worth living, humanity had found its place among the stars, and the galaxy was a brighter place for it. Asterisk.